What does the newly added Michael Hoyt bring to the Buffalo Bills defense, and who is next for the Buffalo Bills to sign in free agency? We're breaking that down for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. We've got a bunch of stuff to cover here today on this episode. Want to discuss the signing of Michael Hoyt to the defense. I want to look at the departure of Mack Hollins and talk about some of the other free agent targets that the Bills could go after at positions of need. And then I have a couple of herd mentality questions that I want to close out the episode with, including a bit of a narrative that's forming about the Bills and the talent on the roster. So we'll talk about that in addition to the results of the NFLPA survey later on today. So a lot to cover. We're recording this thing at 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday, March 11th. So anything that happens after that point, I don't know about it. So we'll get to that in the next episode, but this will be what we cover today. Let's start with the newest addition to the team, Michael Hoyt. And folks, that is how you say the last name. I know people love to let me know if I don't say something correctly or I mispronounce a name or anything like that. Michael Hoyt. Hoyt is the correct pronunciation. Signs a 3-year, $21 million deal with the Bills that is worth up to $24 million. And the way that the contract is structured is it's really a 2-year, $13.43 million deal, and then we'll see for year 3. And so who is Michael Hoyt? Well, he's 27 years old, turns 28 in October, has spent his career with the LA Rams, a practice squad player in year 1, and then became a meaningful part of their defense for the next 4 seasons. He's 6'4", 267 pounds, and he has a really unique path. He was a 310-pound defensive tackle coming out of Brown. And then he trimmed down to like 267 and becomes this hybrid player for the Rams, a really unique guy. It was an undrafted free agent actually in 2020 out of Brown, and he's from Ontario. So both of the players the Bills have signed to this point, Josh Palmer and Michael Hoyt, are from Ontario. So a bit of a homecoming for them. Like I mentioned, 4 actual seasons with the Rams, 68 games, started 31 of them. And then you could just look at his career arc and see that he got more and more opportunity. In his first season, he was on the practice squad. Then in his first actual season, he played 10% of snaps, then 38% of snaps, then 85% of snaps. Then this past season, 57% of their snaps. He's collected 13 and a half sacks in his career, 15 tackles for loss. In terms of pass rush win rate, 10.2% in 2024, 11.6% in 2023. And so let's talk about the skill set, because this is a very unique player. And I studied the tape, watched all of his snaps from 2024, and I just see a really unique player. And I'm really curious to see what Buffalo's plan is for him. And when I think about the player I watched on tape, I saw versatility. They play this guy as really mostly a 3-4 outside linebacker, walk down on the line of scrimmage, but in a stand-up position. Sometimes he plays on the inside as like a true defensive tackle. Not much, but that does happen. He has some reps where he's like a linebacker, like a stack linebacker lined up in the A-gap. The dude plays in a lot of different spots, but mostly for the Rams, it was as a 3-4 stand-up outside linebacker. And, obviously his background is playing defensive tackle, so he can be used in a number of different ways. And I don't want to get crazy here, but if you look at kind of the player that Lorenzo Alexander became later in his career, you could see some parallels. I'm not going to go crazy here, but there's some parallels to that unique deployment and the unique skill set. And then you see a lot of similar stuff with Michael Hoyt. And again, as both players that were linemen that wind up becoming more hybrid type players and mostly kind of 3-4 outside linebackers. And so when you're watching him play on rundowns, sometimes he's setting the edge as a traditional player and squeezing down gaps, and he's firm. He's not a guy that's going to get, easily moved off of his spot, and you can see him squeeze gaps. And I like the way that he takes on pullers and, very high energy player that does his job against the run. And, he can also line up, like I said, in the A gaps and play downhill and play through contact and shoot a gap. I mean, it's a very interesting role. On pass downs, you'll see him sometimes drop into coverage. And I think if you want him to do some shallow zone coverage, do some simulated pressures where you kind of pull him back and he's got a short zone to cover, he can do that. Now, you don't want him to have to deal with a bunch of space, but he's a pretty athletic dude. So I think he can kind of function in space a little bit. But as a pass rusher, you see really high effort. You see a guy that has some pass rush moves, right? He's a guy that will get to counters, right? You'll see him dip and rip. You'll see him swim, club swim combo, some spin stuff. He's got a lot of different moves. I'm not sure he has a go-to move, but where he really wins is with versatility, with size, with athleticism, with effort. And you'll love the way that he plays. I mean, he's got that infectious motor. And I think you can kind of feel this in some players. A undrafted free agent, spent time on the practice squad, kind of a interesting path to the opportunity that he's gotten. And you can feel that in the way that he plays. There's a lot of urgency in how he gets after it. And so look at Michael Hoecht as a piece, right? A piece to the pie, a unique player for their front that they can deploy in a lot of different ways against the run and the pass. Certainly not a difference maker, right? Don't get it twisted. This isn't a player that's going to come in and change the dynamics of the Buffalo Bills defense, but he certainly strengthens what Buffalo has up front. And it's not really a position, but it's almost like I would describe Michael Hoecht as a front seven enforcer, where if you want him to set the edge, you want to blitz him, you want to line him up at different spots, you want him to be a cleanup tackler, he could do it. And if you watch the Rams last year, they're very pressure oriented and very unique with how they attack the pocket with a lot of different skill sets that they have. And Michael Hoecht fit right in, and they did some creative things and created havoc, right, for opponents. And he was part of that mix. And so that's why I go back to that word curious is, what's the plan in Buffalo? Is he just going to be a regular, like, right side defensive end? That maybe he could do that. I think that would kind of take away from the full breadth of what he offers. But I'm fascinated to find out the plan here because he just is really, really a unique player that he's got some special teams background. I think he blocked 3 kicks last year. So he can help this team in a variety of ways. And maybe a little bit of like a Mack Hollins for the defense, right? We appreciated Mack Hollins as a guy that can play outside, play from the slot, play in line, can play special teams, can block, can occasionally catch a pass down the field, does all the little things, right? And you can really just appreciate a player like that. I wonder if there's kind of some defensive parallels that we'll see with Michael Hoecht, now a member of the Buffalo Bills. So I hope that paints a picture for you. He's one of the more unique players I've ever studied, and so it's not a very straightforward, this is who he is, this is what he does, this is how he fits, because that's just not what the film tells you. And so I'm excited. I actually am doing the next thing I'm going to do after I record this podcast is work on a film breakdown for the Herd Mentality Substack. I put one together for Josh Palmer. I published it on Tuesday morning where I went through, and I think I had about 12 different plays where I broke down, I showed the video and did voiceover analysis, kind of breaking down a bunch of different plays that highlights my favorite things about Josh Palmer And I plan on doing that for Michael Hoecht and any player that the Bills add to this roster to kind of supplement the conversations that we're having here, where I can kind of show you exactly what I mean. And so that's available in the Herd Mentality Substack. So if you want to check that out, there's a link in today's show notes that'll take you to the Herd Mentality Substack. You can see the film review on Josh Palmer, and very soon you'll be able to do the same for Michael Hoecht. Again, link in today's show notes to be part of the Herd Mentality Substack, and there's a lot of cool incentives that you get with that, including access to the Discord channel. But check out the content there. We kind of continue the conversation there and expand on it. All right, coming up next, Mack Hollins is a New England Patriot. I want to tell you about that, share some thoughts, and then get into some conversation about the Bills' needs and then the players at each position that I'm targeting. I went through and kind of updated my list of targets at corner, defensive end, and defensive tackle. So we'll do that here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Taking care of your mental health can feel like a big investment, but it's just as important as taking care of your body. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, but with BetterHelp, you can save up to 50% per session. BetterHelp offers a flat fee for weekly online therapy sessions, making professional support more accessible and affordable. With over 30,000 therapists and over 5 million people helped, it's the world's largest online therapy platform. We spend money on gym memberships and healthy food. Why not invest in our mental health and mental well-being as well? Therapy isn't just for tough times. It's a great tool for learning coping skills and how to set boundaries. BetterHelp makes it easy to fit therapy into your schedule, whether you're working, parenting, or just always on the go. You don't have to go through a major crisis to benefit from therapy. Sometimes it's just about having someone to talk to. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. So Mack Hollins is no more one and done in Buffalo, and he did the thing that he's done pretty much every step of his career. And he's never really lasted anywhere for a long time, but he becomes a fan favorite. And then, he finds himself going somewhere else. And the Bills last season gave him the healthiest contract of his career. Well, he was able to really maximize his time in Buffalo and got a decent payday from the New England Patriots. 2-year, $8.4 million deal that maxes out at $10.4 million. So, Mack Hollins, I think he's 32 years old, probably his last opportunity at a deal. And he certainly probably took the contract that gave him the most money. And I could tell you that the Bills were lower on their offer to Mack, pretty substantially lower. And I get it. Like, Mack Hollins was awesome for the Bills. I'm not going to sugar or try to diminish anything that he did. Right. I loved having Mack Hollins around, a very useful player in a lot of different ways. I praised him all season long on this podcast. I don't take any of that back. But I think from the Bills' perspective, right, that's where you kind of have to look at this. And obviously, we don't love that he's now a Patriot. That's not fun. It's good for Mack. I mean, I'm happy for him that he got a really good salary that's going to allow him to cash out at the end of his career. But for the Bills, I mean, you have to ask yourself this question: how much can you really pay your fifth receiver? And you have Josh Palmer and Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel. Three of those guys have contracts. Keon Coleman's on a rookie deal. You're talking about your wide receiver 5. You got to have budgets for each position and what you're going to pay each spot. And I think if Buffalo were to meet this deal at $4.2 million a season with incentives that could take it to $5.2 million a season, that's a lot more than you want to pay your fifth receiver. And so congratulations to Mack Hollins. But I also understand it from the Bills' perspective, where you got to have budgets. You have to have lines on guys that you don't go over. And I think that's the case of what happened with Mack Hollins. And so I think the Bills' top 4 receivers are kind of in place. I mean, I'm not going to say that they couldn't draft someone early or, add a field stretcher or anything like that. But I could see the 4 receivers that I just said being the top 4. And then your wide receiver 5 is, Jalen Virgil / Tyrell Shavers, big body guys that are supposed to be special teams guys that can block, right? That's kind of the investment you want to have in the wide receiver 5 spot. So I'm curious to see, what else happens at receiver for the Bills. But obviously, Mack Hollins has run his course in Buffalo. So Anders asked a question. Anders is in our subtext. He says, how does losing Mack Hollins change our wide receiver dynamic? Can he replace in the free agency or the draft? I guess I kind of already answered this, but you're talking about the fifth receiver. And so I'm looking at maybe an outside investment. The Bills should draft the receiver. They had 10 draft picks, like pick one, see if you get a Khalil Shakir, right? For sure. And if there's one you like early, pick them, right? I mean, I'm not against that. But I think in reality, your top four is Shakir, Palmer, Coleman, Samuel, and then you probably have a competition between Virgil and Shavers right now to be the fifth receiver. And the Bills, the last several years, have rostered 5 receivers. And when they've rostered 6, the 6th one was like Andre Roberts, who's really a returner. So I think 5 is the number for the Bills at receiver. All right, let's talk about these remaining needs for the Bills, because obviously the remaining needs are the biggest needs: defensive end, defensive tackle, and cornerback. And while the Bills, I guess, added Michael Hoyt, who helps with the defensive front, but certainly not everything I think the Bills should do to fortify those spots. So let's start with defensive end, where obviously my hope is that the Bills will trade for Trey Hendrickson. I think that's firmly what I hope happens there. But if not, I'll give you some names that I'm looking at. And I want to start with Leonard Floyd. He was released by the 49ers just before I recorded this podcast, and I could see a lot of social media hype to bring back Leonard Floyd. That's fine for me, right? That's not going to move the needle in a big way. I'll say this about Leonard Floyd. That dude completely disappeared down the stretch for the Bills, which has been pretty characteristic throughout his career. And now he's just 2 years older. I'm not falling over myself to bring Leonard Floyd back. I think there's a good chance of it. I mean, Sean McDermott has spoken very highly of Leonard Floyd, and I think there's certainly a possibility, but I'm not going to be disappointed if that doesn't happen, because he's got a bit of a history of kind of fading late in the season, and boy, he disappeared for Buffalo. Maybe he was playing with an ankle or whatever was going on, but if you could play, you could play. And there's more than just 1 year of him fading down the stretch. And I don't know, I hear from you guys tired of defensive linemen not doing the thing they're supposed to do late in the season. Well, Leonard Floyd, I don't think he had a sack in the last 8 games in Buffalo. So I'm not too antsy there. If the Bills are going to go with an older pass rusher, give me Zadarius Smith. Like, for sure, give me Zadarius Smith. That's like comfortably the old pass rusher I want the Bills to sign. Dante Fowler is on my radar. Charles Omenihu is on my radar. Azeez Ojulari is on my radar. But by far, Zadarius Smith is now the name that I want after Trey Hendrickson. At defensive tackle, Dalvin Tomlinson is expected to be released by the Browns on Wednesday, and that immediately becomes a high priority for me. I think he's a dynamic A-gap defender that's a very good run stuffer. It gives you a little pass rush as well. I think he'd be a great fit. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that the Bills could get that done. Some other names in terms of nose tackles: Fali Fatukasi and Greg Gaines. And then if the Bills are looking for some interior pass rush, Malik Collins and Levi Onwuzurike would be 2 names that stand out for me. And then there's this cornerback thing. And right now, obviously, the Bills have not addressed that spot. There's still a piece of me, I won't lie, I'm not like putting all my eggs in this basket, but there's still a piece of me that wouldn't mind seeing Kaiir Elam compete for the spot. He's only 23 years old, folks. And I know that AFC Championship game was rough, but the Bills' entire spacing was bad in that game with how they were choosing to play man coverage. And Elam was obviously part of the problem, but he's played a lot more games in his career than that. Obviously, he's not played with any level of consistency that tells you he should come in as a guy that has the upper hand to start, but I still have a piece of me that's interested there. Other names, Asante Samuel Jr. I don't think he's a clean fit to the Bills, but I mean, Michael Hoyt's not either. And maybe there is some newness coming to this defense. Maybe it's going to be more pressure oriented. You think about Ryan Nielsen, if there's going to be an influence there. I mean, if that's the case, Asante Samuel kind of works. He just doesn't really tackle. But, the coverage ability, the ball skills are hard to ignore. Jonathan Jones, if Mike Pellegrino says that he can still play, cool, let's do that. Shaq Griffin, would love that. Stephon Gilmore, Akello Witherspoon, Rasul Douglas. Benjamin St. Juste is probably like a very toolsy swing of the bat. 4 years in Washington, obviously a disaster situation until this past year. I wish his last season in Washington was better under Dan Quinn, but very toolsy. He's interesting to me. Kendall Fuller, player I like. Trey White, I don't know. Is it time to start thinking about that type of stuff? But obviously looking for the Bills to do something here at corner because need some help here. Need some help at cornerback. All right, coming up on the other side of it, I have 2 herd mentality questions that I want to get into, including one that will kind of address this narrative that the Bills just have a mid-roster around Josh Allen. I'll give you some thoughts on that here next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet if it wins. That's $200 in extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Picking my favorites, I got a few teams that I have my eye on, some underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. You can stay in the action with tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on. Plus, it's easy and fast. The FanDuel app is easy to use. It's simple. And when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, folks, a couple of herd mentality items that I want to address here next. But first, I want to give a shout out to Eric Wood. He had me on his podcast that dropped on Tuesday, the Centered on Buffalo podcast. It's appointment listening for me. I listen to every episode, and he's got great guests on all the time. I think next week he's going to have Terrell Bernard or Khalil Shakir. I can't remember, but he has players on all the time. And it's an amazing podcast. I was honored to get the invitation to come on with him. So make sure you check that out and support Eric and his work over on the Centered on Buffalo podcast. I was on there for the Tuesday episode. So be sure to check that out. All right, let's start with this question here. I don't have a name. It came from someone in our subtext community, so I don't have their name, but it's a good question that I think will probably get into some of the thoughts that I think a lot of people have, and I'll kind of give my opinion. They say one other thing that might be a good herd mentality option. I normally agree with a lot of your takes on the Bills and team building. I'm a big fan of building from within, drafting well, player development, all that stuff. I like bargain bin free agents. It's made us into a perennial Super Bowl contender. I do want to push back a little bit, and I want your thoughts on this. As good as the Bills have been, I think the current construction of this roster prior to free agency is deficient in game-changing talent. These rosters have been good enough to get us into the divisional round and AFC championship games, but I look at teams that beat us like Kansas City. They have Pat Mahomes, Chris Jones, Andy Reid, Trent McDuffie. Look at the Eagles, all their dudes. The Bills have 17, definitely a dude, but I feel like to get over the hump, it's going to take some true big-time talent. I want DK Metcalf. I want Myles Garrett. I want Trey Hendrickson. Bills have to get this done to get over the hump. All right, so first of all, I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying there, but I want to add some perspective here. And first of all, are we forgetting that this team just came out of a transitional year? They moved away from Stephon Diggs and Tre'Davious White and Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. Like, those were dudes. Those were all dudes. So, let's not be a victim of the moment. The Bills, they literally had a step back year in terms of roster talent because they had to. They had to. So let's be mindful of that. And through that, we've seen a lot of great player development. You see all these contract extensions that are going out, big money to these players, not because they're not good. So that's first of all. Let's not be a victim of the moment and understand that, at the lowest point of the talent the Bills have had in the last 6 years, make this a conversation. That's the NFL. There's life cycles in the NFL. There's windows in the NFL. And the Bills, because they have Josh Allen, are able to stay here, at an A-level type team while the roster kind of has to stabilize in some areas. So let's not be a victim of the moment. I want great players. Like, don't get me wrong. But one thing that I think is getting lost in this conversation as I get feedback about how the Bills have this mid roster and they're not doing all they can to support Josh Allen. Did we watch last season? Clearly, the Bills are one of the best teams in the NFL. Clearly. Obviously, very close to going to the Super Bowl. Like, if the circumstances were slightly different, that has nothing to do with having any different players on the team. Like, if the ball was spotted correctly or if Dalton Kincaid could catch a freaking pass, the Bills are in the Super Bowl. And who knows what happens? Obviously, the Eagles smoked the Chiefs, but the Bills' offensive tackles are way better than Kansas City's, and I think that would have been a much different game. I'm not going to promise you the Bills would have won it, but that would have been a lot different of a game. The Bills almost never get smoked. So I feel like a lot of the conversations that we're having about the Bills are so far from the reality of what this team is. Like, I honestly sometimes feel like I'm talking about a team that wins 8 or 9 games every year and hopes to get into playoffs and is one and done in the playoffs. It's literally never been the case with the Bills since 2019. But the conversation surrounding the team, like, that's how I feel. So yeah, get better talent for sure. How many times have I said, I want Myles Garrett. I want Trey Hendrickson. I want those things too. But I can also look at what this team has told us they are and not get overly panicky about it, because obviously they're close. In a transition year, they were on the doorstep of the Super Bowl. And I just feel like that's so lost right now in these conversations. We have the entire history of the NFL to consider. How often do you see teams just go out there and lose their minds and sign all the free agents and do all these crazy things to build their roster, and it's a path to nowhere? Happens all the freaking time. But we're so obsessed with the shiny new thing. We want names. We want all these things to happen. We want this activity. It's like, I want a intelligently built roster that gives us a chance to win every single year, and I feel like that's happening. So yeah, like simultaneously, yes, like I want the better players. Don't get it twisted. I want more dudes. I want more talent. These are things that I've discussed as well. But can we at the same time acknowledge where this team has been and how close they've been? And that most of the time it's been circumstantial. Now, if you have different players, like maybe the circumstances are different. I get that. I respect that angle as well. But why do I feel like I'm talking about an average football team? The Bills haven't been an average football team in 6 years. Literally one of the best in the league. James says, curious for your thoughts on player ranking of their organization, particularly with McDermott getting a B+. Any weight to them, especially given the recent vibes conversations? I, like you, would have put Miami at the bottom, but the players apparently love it there. Almost too good to be true for ratings. And so I've avoided this conversation, but I respect the question. Came in from James about the NFL PA survey, in case you have no idea what we're talking about. The Bills, or Sean McDermott, got a B+ grade from the players. And so some thoughts on this. First of all, we don't know which players participate in this survey. And I'm unsurprised that in a transitional year where you said goodbye to pillars of your organization for a number of years, that the voting or however that's done comes in less for McDermott this year than it did last year. Who's voting on this? Because I'm guessing Mitch Morse and Tre'Davious White and Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde probably had some pretty nice things to say about Sean McDermott. There's not enough of a controlled variable for me to know how much I should care about this information. And I think the most important thing to take away from that survey is that Mike McDaniel was the highest graded coach in the NFL, an A+. Mike McDaniel. Why was he graded that? Well, because he's known to run a soft training camp where the veterans can pick their schedules and their practice times. And everyone's in sunny South Florida. And I mean, are we surprised that it's a football team that's toughness is questioned every single year? And has historically faded down the stretch. Well, I'm glad they gave their head coach an A+ grade. Can we talk about wins and losses? That's what matters. Now, the interesting thing about that survey was the travel stuff. Like the Bills got like an F- grade for away travel. And evidently the players are not happy that they have to sit, that there's not enough first-class seating or something, and that the first-class seating that does exist goes to like the coaches who are game planning, like on the trip back. I don't know. I'd like for them to get that figured out so that teams, the players could be happier with their travel accommodations, but that was kind of the big takeaway there. All right, folks, there you have it. We'll see what happens next with the Buffalo Bills. Whatever it is, we'll talk about it here on this podcast. Again, this is as of now, it's 3:00 Eastern time on Tuesday, March 11th. So anything that happens after that, I don't know about it, and we'll talk about it in the next episode. All right, folks, thanks for being here. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.